We're back with another PCBH Corner. We have a fantastic topic.
Real quick, can I say, I am excited. What are we at, like 7 weeks to CFHA right now?
Oh.
7, right? We have 3 weeks left of September for, it's exciting.
Yeah.
I know. I'm talking with Mike Bruner, so shout out to Mike Bruner, the team at Health Source, visiting last night. It was just good talking with him and getting excited about all the things related to CFHA. So yeah, excited about it.
I know you said you wanted to do a video a week leading up to CFHA, and this would be number 2.
I tell you, you know what, the one thing I'm going to do real quick, I wonder if I can make sure to lock. You think it's going to lock? Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. We'll keep that. That's all right.
I feel like we're off to a slightly rough start.
It's good. It's good. Here we go.
Okay.
We're back.
We're back. We'll see how controversial this gets. You know how we like to do. But essentially, we try to make PCBH Corners out of topics we run into, common questions that multiple folks end up asking. And one of the ones that constantly comes up is just kind of inquiring about our system at our day job at CHCW and our PCBH service. And, do we have a specialty behavioral health service? That's constantly coming up. And there's a lot of FQHCs that will do that, where they'll basically have their primary care services, and then they have different specialty services too. Some of the FQHCs, both medically and behavioral health wise. And so that's the question that we often get asked is like, hey, how do you guys do it with your PCBH program? And do you have therapists? Or if you're going to hire more people, have you considered hiring therapists or creating a specialty system? So we know what our answer has been historically to that, which is with every resource we get, we reinvest back into PCBH at this point. It's what makes sense for our system. Not saying it can't make sense for other systems, but I'm just kind of wondering what your thought process is. If you can kind of walk me through a little bit as to why in our system, now we're up to over 20 BHCs, that thought process.
Yeah, and I think there's so many different things to go over with this, and I'll try to write down, I'm sure you'll write down different ones, and hopefully we can get through it all in an efficient amount of time. We really do, part of doing these PCBH Corners is not necessary to give answers, but to have people pause and ask questions more. And so I hope, even though we're going to frame it as us talking about our perspective and our approach, that it's not so much seen as an answer, but more as like a prompt to ask questions about just being intentional with what...
Which I know that's kind of our MO.
Yeah.
Is, if you watch our videos, sometimes we give direct, clear answers, but normally the answer is it's contextually based, and you're going to have to ask yourself a lot of questions because you and I are more interested in helping folks become chefs and becoming highly skilled with core principles versus memorizing algorithms.
So there's a couple different ways that my mind goes to this, and maybe we could try to talk about one of them is what happens within systems, or what can potentially happen within systems when there is this sense of like, hey, there's BHCs doing PCBH work, and then there's specialty care. Kind of like what that produces sometimes for the on-the-ground BHCs, the on-ground PCPs, and some maybe, again, well-intentioned and well-meaning efforts, but just could have an unintention and potentially some drawbacks. So I want to talk about that. The other thing that also this brings up is, and this was a great conversation on the listserv about brief therapies and long-term therapies, is, and maybe I'll start with this one. Who was I talking to about this? Oh, I was talking about this with another group that we're consulting with in the Dakotas, and we were talking about this as a group yesterday. I know a lot of times almost like brief therapy is synonymous with primary care or integrated care. It's almost kind of like one and the same. And it's almost kind of like, hey, if you're going into integrated care and primary care, you should do brief therapy. And then also, like, if you're in a traditional setting or a specialty setting, you should do long-term traditional therapy. For me, and Jeff Ryder, I think, wrote a really great post about this on the listserv. For me, I don't see those two related as far as like almost like, are you in integrated care or not? And it's almost like if you're in integrated care, you do brief therapy. If you're not in integrated care, you do traditional long-term therapy. I don't see those two things related at all.
Yeah.
For me, my mind goes that I think we should just rethink mental health and behavioral health regardless of the setting that you're in. So if I, knowing what I know now, would go back into traditional mental health, like a community mental health setting, I wouldn't practice differently than I am right now as a BHC.
Oh, interesting.
I would still very much want my relationship to be fine as a longitudinal relationship throughout the person's life, to be episodic, and to really embrace those components of a single session mindset that Jessica Schleider laid out there. I want to see people for who they are, make sure they feel validated and heard, provide them pragmatic solutions, give them care when it's needed, and make sure I'm accessible, and focus on psychohealth rather than psychopathology. I would do that in any setting that I worked in.
Okay.
So I think that's a big thing, that whenever we get asked this question about like, hey, do you have long-term therapy? The question almost like doesn't make sense to me, because it's like, we aren't doing our form of behavioral health intervention because we're in primary care. There's a part of that, but now it's like, oh, I think this is actually just a really effective way of providing behavioral health services. And in our recent numbers, and I'll kick it over to you, we're at almost 6,000 unique patients in a year seen by our BHC team.
Right.
6,000 unique patients. We're a team, as we said, right now of 20, but our FTE as far as clinical is like, I don't know, 12 or 13.
Right.
6,000 unique patients receive care in our system. If I think about the biggest impact in our community, if I think about the biggest impact across the board, it's not necessarily, yes, it's part of it is because we're in primary care, and that's where people go. The other part is like, we're doing behavioral health differently. Where's your mind go?
Yeah, no, I think you...
I don't know if we took us on a rabbit hole there or...
Yeah, I just think that I see what you're saying now. It's like knowing 10 years in, knowing what we know is different than what we were training for.
Yeah.
12 years ago. But I think it can get confusing because I do think it's really imperative. Let's see how we're going to say that.
Give us grace, love, and compassion if we say something that just really makes people upset.
No, I wasn't going to go that route. It's more like you have to be totally prepared to work efficiently and work in non-traditional amounts of time when you're training to work as a BHC.
Yes.
So in many situations, how it shakes out is short term. Yes. Like you need to learn how to be able to help somebody in one pocket of time.
Yes.
No, I agree with you. I'd argue that'd go for any setting.
Like it really is something, keep where your mind's going. It really is something like, why wouldn't we apply that approach across the board? Like regardless of where you're at. Like why would we not apply that approach across the board?
Yeah, you should do that everywhere. I think it's so illuminated in primary care because you get these little pockets of time. Hey, this patient's agreed to see a BHC today. Oh, they only have 10 minutes. Or, patient agreed to stay. Or patient's coming back in a month and they didn't have time to stay today, but they scheduled with PCP and BHC. So there's just the way the system is set up.
The nature of primary care almost produces that awareness a little bit easier.
Yeah, and so you need to learn how to operate in that way, which then I think lulls us into, because you do need to be able to operate in a shorter period of time more commonly, in a more flexible amount of time more commonly. And so in some ways, even on our videos, even on our trainings, we are talking about that. Like, hey, how to help somebody in this pocket of time.
Yeah.
But then it gets equated with short-term therapy, when for us, the question doesn't even really make sense because in Jody Palaha and others talked about it on a listserv.
Who was the PCP that responded? That was like, oh my gosh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not about short-term or long-term, because if you get into that mindset, you were talking about some of the difficulties that can happen. So if you look at your system as, okay, maybe you have this blended situation where you have the BHCs who are operating in primary care, and then if the patient needs longer term services, then you refer them to the therapist, right? So what happens is, instead of focusing your visit on how can I help this person in the moment, it becomes, or it can, not always, it can Or you could be tempted with a triage and refer model.
Yeah.
So it becomes to where the BHC is triaging situations and assessing, okay, well, this person could be helped in primary care, so I'm going to keep them with me for 1 to 4 visits. This person, they're going to need a higher level of care. Or this person said that they want more traditional therapy, even though they've never tried the BHC stuff, but that's what they came in wanting. So instead of getting started and helping them today per se, because I think that sometimes we've learned to help them, but it's still, the goal is like, how can I get them into therapy?
Rather than 100% of the visit being geared towards,
Correct.
I want to just help this person. A chunk, and whatever percent that chunk is, probably is variable and stuff. There's still a sliver of that variance of what is going on in the visit, and the goal in the visit is to be able to decide, what does this person need? Where do they need to get to?
Where do we need to get them to?
Where do we need to get them to?
How can we help them? And you can make the argument, well, doesn't primary care, isn't that a huge part of what we say is like coordination of care and referrals? But that's only after a relationship is established and you're working with somebody and the need becomes clear. So we get asked all the time, well, when do you refer out?
Yeah. And
I'm like,
the answer is,
I don't want to say never,
right?
But it wouldn't be right off it would be very rare off the bat. And I know that we had made that other PCBH corner and we did that other demonstration where basically if I'm with a patient, I'm going to do everything I can to help them now and give it a chance. And if they're coming in multiple times asking for things we don't do, hey, I want the psychological assessment done. Hey, I want EMDR. If that's what's coming up, then it's like, okay, let's have a conversation. I'm still your BHC, but it seems like we maybe need to get a referral going.
I love how you're describing that because it really is an interesting thing that we rarely talk about. It's just, what do these systems and logistics, what do they do to the BHCs immediately enter the room? It's something that I talk a lot about with the trainees about, hey, I want you to go into the room and solely your goal, your job is just to help this person and to be curious about this person, right? But as we start to add these different things and different systems, if it starts to creep in, it's like, well, not only do I need to do that, I got to be able to predict who needs what, which then gets us in a really interesting question that won't go down that rabbit hole about who is PCBH made for, who is it not made for, and then this usually produces this response severe mental illness, substance use, all these different things, trauma, all these different things should be referred out immediately, where ironically, and particularly things like severe mental illness, if you go to UpToDate and point of care resources, one of the most important things for them is to have a longitudinal accessible access to their healthcare system. Yeah. It's like, why would we not provide the care then within primary care?
And if they feel more comfortable.
Correct.
In the setting. So you got to ask yourself, why is that the case?
And Bridge, how many times have we been in systems shadowing? And again, grace, love, and compassion for everybody because everybody's just doing the best they could. How often we have physically been in rooms where patients are saying they want help. And the BHC, because very well intentioned, is kind of saying, we'll get you the help you need.
Yes.
And it's very much conveyed to the patient, it's not going to be today. Yours and my interaction is not going to be today.
I'll do you one better.
Yeah.
As a one-upper. No, I'm kidding. What I had observed in those situations was the BHC was helping the patient.
Yes.
And didn't recognize
it was
the full extent that they were helping them. So then the latter half of the visit, instead of, hitting it home with all the help that they were providing,
they talked themselves out of it.
Yeah, essentially, because it was like, well, how are we going to get... And here's all the grace, love, and compassion that I have for these situations. Because we know how patients are when they have a good experience with somebody who cares about them and is interested in them, and then they reveal things, they want to keep seeing that person. So I have all the empathy.
Right.
Grace, love, and compassion, as we're saying, that if you're a BHC in the system and you have quote-unquote long-term therapists or especially mental health therapists, and you're diving in, making this deep personal connection, and this, again, period of time could be 18 minutes.
Could you imagine, let's even back this scenario up, right? Because one of the things that you talked about was the BHC having to triage and refer, and just how that can be a difficult thing. And we'll talk about the ripple of that, almost naturally eroding the BHC believing in their work, right?
So I wrote that down too.
Oh, did you write that down? Okay. So let's even back up further to the PCP, right?
Okay.
So the PCP in a system where they have BHCs readily available, and then they also have a long-term therapy. A lot of times what systems will do, and it makes sense why systems would do this, is that they don't want the PCP just to refer directly to the long-term special.
Yeah, because we all know if you do a 60-minute or 90-minute intake, it's a big resource that will be wasted if the person isn't bought in.
Because we also know, right, as you're saying, the research that shows about people actually following up and a lot of no-shows and stuff. So it behooves systems, and it's like, hey, let's make sure we get them connected with the BHC first, and then we'll go from there. Think about the PCP in this situation.
Okay.
Say the PCP is like, I really believe in long-term therapy, and they need to get to therapy. How do you think they're going to describe that situation to the patient?
With BHC coming in?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a situation where, hey, we're going to have somebody come in, they're going to ask you some questions, get to know your situation a little bit, and kind of see if we can get you into our services here.
So think about the patient response then. As you were saying just a minute ago, why would the patient, knowing that this person is just coming in to triage them, why would they open up about things that are going on? Like, why would they, if someone is even trained to do like the contextual interview and all that, it literally is setting the frame up for the person to be like, oh, I'm not like, oh, so this is just like a holding pattern right now. This is just someone coming in to just suspect. I'll get to the real treatment.
Right. So you basically, now I'm jumping the gun.
Please.
You're literally undermining everything you're doing.
And
like everything is being
undermined immediately.
Undermined.
Immediately. And this goes into this idea, which we obviously have, I think we've made corners and stuff about this, and definitely I think the signal session one, of this then makes it into PCBH, BHCs, it's therapy light.
Yeah.
It's for mild to moderate concerns. Anything beyond that needs to go to the real therapy, the real work that's going on. And that's where immediately from that conversation, the patient, maybe overtly, and mostly probably inadvertently, or kind of, is that a word?
Inadvertently.
Inadvertently, there we go. Jeez, oh man, right? Subtly is receiving that message that this BHC, their therapy light, the real therapy, is somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole thing from the jump,
undersell,
is what?
Underselling.
Underselling
what the BHC is going to be able to do.
Underselling, undermining, and so okay, you're a BHC, and you go to one of our trainings. Yeah, it doesn't have to be our training. You go to a training, and they're talking about maybe Jeff Wright or whatever, and they're talking about doing the deep work, showing up and helping patients, and I know that we talk about running down the hall to stop somebody leaving from a warm handoff. What would ever make you want to do that if you just ran into a triage and refer situation?
Bridge.
Because where's the urgency? But if you believe and you can get something important done in that moment, that creates the urgency, and that creates, I want to say the job, the employee engagement, the BHC engagement.
Yes.
Because who went into this field to not do important work?
Bridge. It literally activates that great quote that I love that you came up with. We cannot feel gross about the work that we're doing. If a BHC sees their job as solely mild to moderate, that they have to triage and refer, just naturally, I feel like it's going to erode what they believe they can offer. And I don't know, there's this moment of being like, if I thought, we talked about this before, like if I thought my stuff wasn't helping someone or couldn't help, like I would burn out. Like I wouldn't be able to believe in it.
Oh, and what I was saying before we, went back from the PCP perspective, say you are that BHC and you are deeply connecting with somebody in 18 minutes. They told you stuff that they've never told anybody before. You're probably feeling like, well, now I'm doing something wrong because I'm not going to be available for this handoff or that handoff. And so you're kind of disincentivized. Or de-incentivized? Oh, now we're both making up words.
I tell you what.
De-incentivized.
Pulling a Dave.
I know. You're de-incentivized because it's almost like, oh, hey, save that for the real work. And understandably.
It would make sense within that context to be able to do that behavior.
Yeah, because why would you go into it? And of course, as we know, you never know if there's been so many situations where I meet with somebody and we go deep super quick and 24 minutes later, we got a good plan, things happen, and you're thinking to yourself, man, this person's going to be coming back once every 2 weeks for probably a good chunk of time because that's how much they're into it. And they have stuff to work on. Sure enough, they come back and they're like, actually, I'm doing really good. And we all have the situations where something seems very minor, very mild.
Right.
And, 28 minutes later, you got a good plan. You're thinking to yourself, hey, heck, I'll see this person in a year.
Yeah, this person doesn't even follow up. They don't,
And they're back on your schedule in 2 weeks. And then a year later, you're like, oh, I guess we've been working on stuff for a hot second. So I get the point is you just never quite know. And so I would imagine as a BHC in a system where if you're going, quote unquote, deep and making these deep personal connections, now the patients want to meet up with you. Well, then what's the therapy service going to be if you're the one who's taking all of them and then your boss is like, hey, you're not getting handoffs, you're not available, but really it might not be that they're doing anything wrong. It could be that the ratios are kind of funky. They're not funky, but
so now the obvious thing that comes up is like, oh, we need to get like a regular traditional therapist to manage all these people that are rather than looking at it's like, hey, the ratios might be a little bit off.
We need to
hire more people.
So that's why in our system at this point, and there's so many contextual variables, and
again, this should be a video not providing answers, should be asking more questions.
For us, looking at the situation, we ask ourselves, is every patient in our system being supported BHC-wise? The answer at this point is no. Even though our penetration rates are fantastic, what are we at? 30?
30 out of mothership, 25 overall.
So a third, close to a quarter or a third of patients are getting BHC support. Until that's 50% or 75%, for our system, it doesn't make sense, in our opinion, to add a therapist because every BHC you add to the team, 5% of them are going to be working with somebody a little bit more, it's going to look a little bit more consistent. You know how we always talk about doing episodic work? Hey, primary care is episodic. Well, 5% of the time, 10% of the time, it's going to look a little bit more consistent. That does not mean you're doing something wrong.
Correct.
And I bet you if you run the numbers, you're going to think it's more because you're going to remember more of the
just naturally
regular patients who are coming in. But if you do a statistical analysis, it will come out to 5 to 10%. And when we had done it, it was way closer to 5%. Of patients were seen on a more regularly consistent basis. So if you're going to go make a separate service for them, that's a whole situation.
Correct.
Whereas every BHC that you add, that means that, in our system, I have 5% more traditionally consistent. You have 5%. The other 18 BHCs have 5%.
So since we have the people power, it can absorb it. As well as, and absorb it sounds bad, like it's a bad thing to absorb. Like it's not a bad thing. It can withstand what that is, and we don't have to do a separate system.
And because we have so many BHCs running around in our system, and we know the high touch points and the reach, the many patients, as we know in any setting, are going to come in for the mode, which is the mode being one for one psychotherapeutic encounter. So setting it up like this, you get to reach the masses and meet the demands of the masses. You get to be a great team member alongside your medical team. And then when there are the more traditionally consistent, and it's a little less episodic, although we have tons of episodic as well. We have the one and dones. We have episodic. We have one visit about a year, which I don't know what that is exactly considered, but that you see that all the time in primary care. And then you have the folks that it's going to be once every 2 to 3 weeks or once a month, very consistently, and that might be another 5%. So with the BHC role, you're able to absorb that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, as always, let us know where your minds are going, thoughts, reactions, rumbling back with us. And as we said, this should prompt more questions, not necessarily give an answer. So till next time, thanks for stopping by.